After my husband passed, I sold the old place. Creaky floors, too many rooms, the garden we could never quite tame, and used the money to help Dan and Sarah buy their dream home. 2 stories, pale blue siding, right on the lake in Michigan. It had a wide porch for summer evenings and a big kitchen where the smell of cinnamon rolls could drift clear up the staircase. I visited often. Sometimes with a pot of stew, sometimes just to sit with the kids while they built block towers and argued about crayons. Sarah would smile when she opened the door, apron dusted with flour, and Dan always insisted I stay for dinner. We laughed over burnt toast, played cards at the kitchen table, and lined the hallway with framed photographs. Birthdays, first steps, lakeside picnics. From the outside, everything looked exactly as I'd hoped it would when I signed over that cashier's check to the realtor. My son's family settled, happy, safe. And in those first months, I told myself that was enough. The last time I came over, the air was sharp with the first hint of winter. I'd baked an apple pie and wrapped it in one of Richard's old tea towels for the drive. Dan opened the door before I knocked, the cold rushing past him into the warmth of the house. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling. But there was something tight about it, like the smile didn't quite belong to him. Before I could step inside, he added lightly, "Oh, don't go upstairs, okay?" I must have looked puzzled because he went on, still smiling. "It's just a mess up there. Toys, laundry, you know." I nodded, the way you do when you don't want to make a fuss. My fingers itched from the cold, so I adjusted the pie in my hands and followed him toward the kitchen. But as I passed the staircase, something in his voice stayed with me. Not the words themselves, but the way they landed. Too quick. Too rehearsed. Like the real reason was tucked away up there behind a closed door. And for the first time in years, I noticed that I was no longer part of this house in the way I thought I was. The first few days of that visit felt almost like old times, at least on the surface. Mornings began with the chatter of the children in the kitchen, their feet pounding down the stairs, the clink of spoons in cereal bowls. I'd sit at the table with my tea, smiling as they ran past, hair still tangled from sleep. Sarah seemed glad for the extra hands. "Could you slice the fruit while I pack lunches?" she'd ask, sliding the cutting board toward me. I didn't mind. My hands have always liked to be busy. I washed the grapes, trimmed the strawberries, arranged them neatly in containers. She didn't say thank you, but I told myself she was just distracted. Dan worked from home most days now. His office tucked into what had once been the guest room. I rarely saw him before noon, though once or twice he stepped out to grab more coffee. I'd try to catch his eye, ask how things were going, but he always seemed to be mid-thought, one hand on the mug, the other scrolling his phone. "Busy morning," he'd mutter before disappearing again. The small things started to collect, like dust you only see when the sunlight hits it just right. The toys I'd brought for the kids last Christmas, wooden blocks from a small shop in town, a painted train set that reminded me of Dan's childhood, were gone from the playroom shelves. One afternoon, while looking for a broom in the hall closet, I found them stuffed into a box, lid half closed, wedged between an old vacuum and bags of last summer's clothes. I closed the closet quietly, as though I'd seen something private. It wasn't just the toys. The photo of me holding Emma on her first birthday, once framed in the hallway, had been replaced by a picture of Sarah's parents on a beach. My old casserole dish, white with blue cornflowers, was no longer in the kitchen cupboards. When I asked, Sarah said she thought it had cracked and tossed it out. I told myself these were small things, not worth dwelling on. But then came the phone call. Sarah was standing by the sink, phone tucked between shoulder and ear, hands deep in soapy water. I just set the pie I'd baked that morning on the counter. She didn't see me walk in. "Yes, she's here," she said to whoever was on the other end. Her voice light but with a curl of something sharp beneath it. "Oh, she's fine, always puttering around, cooking, cleaning. You know. She's already given us what she had. Now she can just help out." I stood there, my hands resting on the pie tin, the smell of cinnamon and butter rising into the space between us. She turned and saw me. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, and then she smiled. "That smells amazing. The kids will love it." I smiled back, but something in me had shifted. The next morning, she asked if I'd mind watching the children while she ran errands. I said of course. She returned hours later, carrying bags from shops I knew weren't for groceries. I was sitting with the kids in the living room, reading aloud from a book I used to read to Dan. She dropped the bags in the hallway, breezed past and said, "I'll just go lie down for a bit. You can start dinner if you like." It wasn't a request. Dan came downstairs while I was stirring the soup. He didn't ask about my day or how I'd been sleeping. He just reached past me for the bread knife, muttered something about needing to make a sandwich, and went back up without another word. That night, as I cleared the dishes, I realized neither of them had thanked me. Not for the cooking, not for watching the kids, not for anything. It was as if my presence was expected, my work invisible. Invisible but necessary. Later, while tucking Emma into bed, she asked if I'd be staying in the little room again. He nodded. She yawned, already half asleep, and murmured, "Daddy says you like it here." I smiled and kissed her forehead, but the words stayed with me. Liking it here wasn't the same as belonging. The following day, I overheard another conversation, this time between Dan and Sarah, their voices low but carrying through the thin wall between the kitchen and the stairwell. "She's fine," Dan was saying. "It's not like she has anywhere else to be." Sarah laughed softly. "I know. And honestly, it's easier this way. She likes feeling useful. Let her." I stood in the hallway, holding a basket of folded laundry, my knuckles whitening around the fabric. I thought of the years after Richard died, when I'd kept busy by knitting blankets for the children, baking for school fundraisers, driving over with homemade dinners when Dan and Sarah first moved in together. I'd thought of it as love. Now I wondered if it had only ever been convenience for them. That evening, Sarah asked if I could come with her to pick up groceries. I agreed, thinking maybe a little time together might soften things. We walked through the store, and she dropped items into the cart without asking my opinion. At checkout, she turned to me and said, "Would you mind covering it? I forgot my card." Paid, of course. But when we got home, she didn't say thank you. She just handed me 2 bags to carry inside and went upstairs without another word. By the end of that week, the house felt different to me. Not colder exactly, but I had become part of the background, like the clock on the wall or the rug under the table. Always there, always in use, but never really noticed. At night, lying in the small guest bed, I listened to the faint hum of their voices downstairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was easy, relaxed. It wasn't the tone they used with me. I thought again about the toys in the closet, the missing photo, the casserole dish thrown away. The way Dan's eyes seemed to pass over me, even when I was speaking. The way Sarah's voice curled around that sentence. "She's already given us what she had." I told myself I was imagining things. That it was just the way families are. Messy, imperfect, occasionally thoughtless. But deep down, I knew something else was moving beneath the surface. And whatever it was, it had been there long before Dan told me not to go upstairs. 2 mornings later, I decided to stay the night instead of driving back to my small apartment. Sarah had mentioned she'd be out with friends late, and Dan would be working in his office most of the evening. I thought maybe a quiet night in the house, just me and the children, might feel like old times. The kids were in the garden by mid-morning, bundled in sweaters, hunting for last leaves to press into their scrapbook. From the kitchen window, I could see them crouched near the fence, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Dan was out there too, kneeling beside the raised bed, pulling up what was left of the tomato plants. His back was to the house. The staircase stood empty in the hallway behind me. I thought about his words from the week before. "Don't go upstairs, Mom," and the way he'd smiled without warmth when he said it. I'd avoided the second floor all week, telling myself it was none of my business. But now the children were outside and so was Dan. Sarah wouldn't be home for hours. My feet carried me toward the steps before I'd made a conscious decision. The carpet on the stairs was clean, almost new-looking. No toys, no laundry piles. No evidence of the mess Dan had mentioned. I climbed slowly, my hand resting on the polished banister, the sound of my own breathing loud in the hush of the house. At the top, the hallway stretched in both directions, Emma's room on the left, the guest room where I'd been sleeping straight ahead, and at the far end, Dan and Sarah's bedroom. The door was ajar. I hesitated only a second before pushing it open. The bed was neatly made, a folded throw draped across the footboard. The curtains were drawn back, letting in the pale winter light. On the dresser, beside a framed photo of the children, sat an open suitcase. I stepped closer. Inside, neatly stacked, were papers. Dozens of them. My papers. The top sheet was a statement from my old bank account, dated 2 years ago. Beneath it, another and another. My name in bold at the top of each page, my balances, my transactions. I recognized the envelope they'd been in, cream-colored, with a faint watermark. I'd kept them in my desk for years. And beside the stack, lying in plain view, was the small brass key to my home safe. The sight of it made my chest tighten. That key had never left my possession, except for the brief times I'd hidden it behind a row of books on my shelf. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cold metal. It hit me then, not like a flash but like a slow, heavy wave. Dan's warning to stay downstairs, the absence of any real mess on the stairs, the sudden coldness in his voice these past weeks. He hadn't been worried about toys or laundry. He'd been keeping me away from this. I stood there, staring at the key, trying to steady my breathing. My hands itched to scoop up the papers, to take them with me. But footsteps in the driveway below froze me in place. The front door opened. Voices floated up. Dan's deeper tone, the children's excited chatter. I quickly set the key back down, arranging the papers exactly as I'd found them. My heart pounded in my ears as I stepped back from the dresser. I closed the bedroom door gently, careful not to let the latch click too loudly. By the time Dan's footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs, I was in the hallway, smoothing the quilt on the guest bed like I'd been there all along. At lunch, I couldn't taste a thing. Sarah had returned by then, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She chatted about the shops she'd visited, the scarf she'd found on sale. Dan barely looked at me. But my mind was still upstairs, on that open suitcase and the brass key that had no business being in this house. That night, I lay awake long after the rest of the house was quiet. I stared at the shadows on the ceiling, tracing the shape of the suspicion that had taken root in me. I didn't want to believe it. Not about my son. But the evidence had been sitting in plain sight, daring me to name it. In the morning, I left earlier than planned. I told Sarah I needed to check on a neighbor who'd been ill. She waved from the sink without turning. Dan was in his office. Neither of them asked when I'd be back. The drive home felt longer than usual, the lake flashing silver between the trees as I wound my way back toward town. I kept seeing that key in my mind, the neat stacks of paper that should have been in my locked desk drawer. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even take off my coat before walking straight to my bedroom. The safe sat in the corner of the closet, tucked beneath a folded quilt. My hands shook as I fit the combination and turned the handle. The door swung open easily. Too easily. Inside was nothing but air. The felt-lined shelves where my mother's jewelry had rested were bare. The small tin that had held old savings bonds, gone. The envelope of cash I kept for emergencies, the watch Richard had given me on our 25th anniversary, vanished. I sank to the floor, the cold from the closet tile seeping through my knees. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was fact. Someone had been in my safe. Someone had taken what wasn't theirs. And now I knew exactly who had the key. I closed the safe slowly, my breath shallow, my thoughts loud. Upstairs in that lake house, my son had warned me away from the truth. But I had seen it anyway. And too late or not, I would not unsee it. I sat on the closet floor until my knees complained, the open safe gaping like a mouth that had already said everything. The felt impressions where necklaces once lay looked like small, private graves. I reached in anyway, as if something might have slipped behind the back panel, as if grief were a trick hinge. There was nothing. Only the faint smell of cedar from the closet and the colder scent of metal. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and shut the door gently. No tears. Just a steadying breath, the kind you take before stepping off a curb. On the nightstand, my old notebook waited with a clipped stub of a pencil tucked in the spiral. I wrote what was gone: Mother's chain with the oval locket, Richard's watch, savings bonds, Series E, envelopes labeled 1991, 1992, 1993, cash, 2,000 small bills. I added a line and pressed harder. Key missing. The house was very quiet. The silence wasn't comfort anymore. It had the sound of a lid sliding into place. At the kitchen table, I opened my laptop and logged into the bank. The page took its time to load, as if reluctant to show me what was already true. I clicked through the accounts. The travel fund I kept for the children, emptier than I remembered. Small transfers spaced apart like careful footsteps. Notes. Lawn service, contractor hold, device purchase. The checking account showed limits lifted the week before my last visit. The savings displayed a pending transfer flagged as verification required to an unfamiliar name, something like Ashbay Holdings. It had the bland, manufactured feel of a shell. I dialed the bank. A measured voice answered. Whitaker, a name I knew from holiday cards. While he verified me, I stared through the window at the bird feeder. Cardinal hopped once, then twice, indecisive. Mrs. Brown, he said at last, we did flag a series of access events. A secondary login, attempted password resets on your profile. The system required two-factor. The code was entered correctly. My phone didn't receive any codes, I said. There's a second number on file, he replied. Ending in 64. Sarah's last two digits. The facts sat between us for a moment, polite and absolute. Asked for holds. He offered them. Freeze on outgoing wires, new daily limits, branch-only authorizations. I said yes to each one. He read the confirmations with care, each policy like a small gate closing. When he finished, his tone softened. Would you like to remove an authorized agent on your profile? Yes, I said. Remove Daniel Brown immediately. He cleared his throat. We do have a durable power of attorney uploaded last spring naming him as financial agent. I never executed one, I said. Then someone uploaded a draft, he replied. It lacks the second witness line. It is not enforceable, but it opened a review window. And during review, some representatives extend partial access. Close the window, I said. Mark any such document void. Note, client repudiates. Put it in whatever language makes people stop. He paused, then said, Understood. When I hung up, the sunlight had shifted from the table to the floor, and the bird feeder was empty. My tea, untouched, had made a pale ring on the wood. I wiped it away and called my lawyer. Carson answered on the second ring. He has a voice that's mostly air, the way lawyers sound when they want to be a wall and a door at once. I told him the facts first. The safe, the papers, the key in my son's bedroom, the flagged transfers. I kept my voice even and my sentences short. Come in at 4, he said. Bring your notebook and any photos you can take without being noticed. We'll start with revocations. Then we'll draw a circle no one wants to cross. I printed recent statements, slid them into a red folder, then walked room to room with my phone, recording what was left and where it lived. The habit felt practical, like labeling boxes before a move. In the hallway closet, I took a photo of the empty space on the top shelf where the document envelope had slept for years. In the den, I opened the desk drawer and photographed the neat rectangle of dust where my bank files had rested. Absence can be evidence when a life has been tidy. I changed my clothes before I drove. Nothing that made noise, nothing sharp. On the way, I stopped at the locksmith. The man behind the counter was young and careful with old women. He listened without interruption and nodded as if I were giving him a recipe. By the time I left, my doors had an appointment for new locks, and I had a discreet box of small sensors in my purse, the kind that talked to a camera quietly. At the law office, the carpet smelled like vacuum lines and lemon. Carson greeted me with 2 folders and a pen that was heavy enough to make the signatures feel like decisions. We began with a general notice. Revocation of any and all purported powers of attorney, executed and witnessed, notarized at the conference table where the ficus in the corner pretended to be a tree. He added a letter to the bank's legal department, a short, precise paragraph that read like a closed fist. Client withdraws all prior consent. All access must be in person. All proposed agents denied. He looked up. We'll file a police report for the safe contents. Not to prosecute today. To timestamp the loss. Police reports keep time honest. He nodded. We won't say names. We'll say items, dates, and the fact of the missing key, he replied. Names belong in sealed envelopes until someone denies gravity. He made copies and slid the originals to me. Paper has a sound when it's folded with intent. He drafted one more document, a notice to Dan, prepared but not sent. Cease any access or representation. Do not enter client property except by written appointment. He placed it face down, a card we would play when the table was crowded. Now, he said, we gather. Quietly, I said. He smiled without his eyes. Of course. On my way home, I drove through the slow streets of the neighborhood and stopped at a small store to buy batteries, a thumb drive, and a roll of painter's tape. Back at the house, I set the new camera above the entry, one in the hallway, and one in the bedroom with a closet safe. I tested angles, watched myself on the small screen crossing my own rooms like a witness. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote a list in columns. Who knows what? Who thinks they know? Who must be told last? Beside Dan's name I wrote, assumes access. Beside Sarah's, manages details. Beside Emma's I wrote nothing. She is a child. Her name is not a lever. Near dusk, the phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. A photo of the children holding paper crowns. Emma says good night, Grandma. I typed a warm reply. Kiss them for me and set the phone face down. Politeness is a coat one can wear even while packing a suitcase. In the morning I drove to the bank in person. The lobby smelled like toner and resolution. I asked for Whitaker. He met me in a small glass room and printed a log of every attempt, each entry a small act of translation. Who, when, from which device. We added my new instructions in ink, not just in clicks. He suggested a safe deposit box. I agreed. We walked to the vault, and he handed me a key that had real weight. I placed inside the bonds that were left from a different drawer, my passport, the old title to the car, and the little notebook that had grown into a map. Will you need a second key holder? He asked. No, I said. Not this time. At the police station, I sat on a hard chair and explained missing things to a woman who typed like she was measuring flour. She asked for valuations. I gave memories instead. Mother wore the locket on Sundays. The watch ticked a little slower after 2008. She did not write those parts. She handed me a number on a card and said to keep any receipts I could find. At home I brewed tea and opened the red folder. I slid the police report copy behind the bank letters and the revocation, then labeled the tab in small, neat print. Day 1. In the afternoon my doorbell rang. A delivery. 2 small signs I had ordered from the locksmith's kiosk. Premises monitored. I taped one inside the back window. Sometimes warnings are not for strangers. They are mirrors for people who believe houses love them back. I called the county clerk next. Deed records, lien searches, any filings with my name attached. The clerk on the phone was kind and thorough. You're clear, she said. One home, one name. Worse. Nothing else, nothing new. Please notify me if anyone breathes near it, I said. She laughed softly, not unkindly, and added an alert to my file. Near evening, I opened a box from the basement. The old camcorder Richard bought when Emma was born. I charged it and felt foolish until it blinked steady. I set it in the den aimed at the desk. Red lights make honest witnesses. When the sun went down, I walked the perimeter of the house with a small flashlight. The maple out front held the last of its leaves like a handful it couldn't let go. On the porch, I sat for a while with my coat buttoned to the throat and listened to the lake wind carrying the faint sound of boat rigging from somewhere I couldn't see. I thought of the upstairs bedroom at the lake house, the open suitcase, the brass key set among the papers as if it had nothing to hide. I thought of Dan's smile and how it didn't reach the place where a son ought to live. I didn't make speeches in my head. I made a plan. Tomorrow I would visit the jeweler to ask for past appraisals. He keeps carbon copies in a drawer that sticks. I would call Richard's old friend at the credit union, the one who dislikes messy ledgers. I would email Emma's teacher to confirm a pickup time for next week. Not to see the house. To see the child in my car under my watch, the way steadiness remembers itself. Before bed, I opened the safe again. Empty still. I placed inside the new house keys from the locksmith, a folded copy of the revocation, and a single lavender sachet, useless and comforting. I closed the door and spun the dial, counting the clicks softly, as if I were putting a baby back to sleep. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed. I poured the water, let the tea darken without stirring, and stood at the window. Across the glass, my reflection looked like a woman I recognized. Smaller than I remembered, yes, but upright. The kind who sets things in order before the storm claims it did all the work. I turned off the lights, checked the locks, and slid the bolt with the same small satisfaction as writing the last word on a list. Then I went to bed and slept without dreaming, because I had already named what was true, and truth, once spoken, even on paper, does not require apology. I didn't tell anyone about the empty safe that day. Not Iris. Not my neighbors. Certainly not Dan. Instead, I sat in my kitchen with a legal pad and a pen, writing out a list. Not of suspects, there was no need for that, but of tasks. Steps to take in order without emotion. By evening, the list was neat and numbered. Change locks. Install cameras. Move remaining valuables to a safe deposit box. Revoke Dan's power of attorney, if he'd somehow acquired it. Consult my lawyer. Obtain full copies of my recent bank activity. Secure all passwords. I slept better with that list under my pillow than I had in weeks. The next morning I started with the locks. The locksmith was a small man named Reuben with a deep voice and a polite way of averting his eyes when I lingered near the door. He replaced the front and back door locks with a smooth efficiency that told me he'd done this for other people with similar, unspoken reasons. Keep the spares somewhere they can't find them, he said when he was done, not asking who they were. By lunchtime, a technician was drilling small, discreet holes above the door frames and under the eaves for the cameras. These store footage locally and in the cloud, he explained. If someone tries to remove them, you'll still have the video. He nodded. The idea of a silent witness comforted me. At the bank, I asked for a private room. The manager, a woman in her 40s with a clipped tone, brought in a folder of my account statements. You've had several attempted transfers in the last month, she said, flipping to the highlighted entries. All blocked by our system for unusual activity. The amounts were not small. Twice, someone had tried to move $15,000. Once, $7,500. The accounts they'd been directed to were out of state, and the names meant nothing to me. I asked her to freeze all non-essential transfers, to issue me new cards, and to print a record of every login to my online banking in the last 3 months. She hesitated when she saw one of the IP addresses. That's local, she said. Within 5 miles of here. I didn't have to ask whose house that was. That evening, I sat with my lawyer, Mr. Hamilton, a man I'd known since Richard was alive. His eyebrows rose slightly when I told him what I'd found upstairs. They rose higher when I mentioned the empty safe. Revoke anything he might have, he said without pause. If you've ever signed a power of attorney, even temporarily, it ends today. He drafted the revocation on the spot, had me sign it, and promised to file it first thing in the morning. By the time I left, the only thing left in my home that could be taken without my permission was the air itself. 3 days later, Emma knocked on my door. She stood there holding her phone like a fragile bird. "Grandma," she whispered, "I think you should see this." She scrolled through screenshots, transfers from accounts I recognized as mine into one in Dan's name. The amounts matched the failed attempts the bank had flagged. Then she played a short audio clip. Dan's voice, low but clear. "Once it's in my name, it's safe. Mom won't even know it's gone until it's too late. Emma's hand shook as she locked the screen. I didn't mean to listen. Dad left his phone in the kitchen and a notification came up. I put my hand over hers. You did the right thing, darling. I didn't ask why she'd brought it to me and not to her parents. Already knew. That night, I added one last item to my list. Say nothing until the moment matters. The next time Dan called, his voice was smoother than it had been in weeks. Hey, Mom. Thinking of coming by Sunday? Not this week, I said. I've got a few things to take care of. I didn't tell him those things included securing my will, moving my bonds into a separate account he didn't know existed, and leaving a sealed envelope with Mr. Hamilton that read, in block letters, to be opened in the event of my death. The counterattack was quiet, deliberate, and invisible from the outside. From his point of view, nothing had changed. From mine, everything had. They came on a Thursday, late enough that the light had turned the lake to pewter. I saw their car through the front window before the bell rang. Dan stood on the porch with his hands jammed in his pockets, Sarah half a step behind him, mouth set the way people set their mouths when they've decided the ending. I opened the door but did not move aside. Mom, Dan said softly, like we were beginning a kindness. We need to talk. We can, I answered. On the porch. A flicker passed over his face. Sarah looked past me as if I were the frame of a doorway. It's cold, she said, though it wasn't. Let's not make this difficult. I stepped onto the porch, pulled the door closed behind me, and slid the new deadbolt with a small click. The sound found both of them. Sarah's eyes rested on the lock like it had insulted her. Dan started with concern, the gentle script. People are worried about you, he said. You've been impulsive. Bank's lawyers. Emma tells us you've been saying strange things. Emma didn't say that, I said. You did. He ignored it. Sarah folded her arms, a picture of patience. We're trying to keep this from becoming public, she said. But you can't shut us out. Not after everything we've done. What is it you've done? Yes. It wasn't a challenge. It was a request for an inventory. She smiled without teeth. We've shouldered you, she said. All the rides, the errands, the paperwork. Dan took time off work to manage your accounts. I built the household you enjoy. The least you can do is stop with the theatrics. She meant the locks, the cameras, the holds on the accounts. She meant the sudden shape of a boundary. Dan tried a different door. Look, if you were worried about a few transfers, you could have come to me. I'm your son. He said the word as if it were a credential. I thought of the brass key in their bedroom and kept my face still. We'll handle any concerns through counsel, I said. You can contact Mr. Hamilton. He'll respond during business hours. Sarah's cheeks flushed. So that's it. We're the enemy now. She glanced at the windows, at the quiet order of my living room beyond the glass. You wouldn't even have this house if it weren't for us. I let the sentence sit in the air until the wind pinned it to the railing. This is my house, I said. That sentence was never true. A car eased past on the road, tires whispering over the damp. Dan took a breath that wanted to be a threat and made it a sigh. Neighbors will hear, he murmured. Let's not embarrass anyone. Then don't raise your voices, I said. He tried again. Mom, you're making mistakes. Bad ones. The girls need stability. If you go through with this, locking us out, people will think you're slipping. There it was. The word they'd been circling. Flipping. A diagnosis offered by amateurs with an interest. I had a cognitive evaluation last month, I said calmly. Clear and signed. Would you like a copy sent to your attorney? He blinked. He didn't know about the evaluation. Sarah looked down at her shoes. Go home, I said. Send any concerns in writing. Sarah stepped forward, but I did not step back. You can't keep the kids from us, she said. I have kept nothing from anyone, I answered. I have only kept what is mine. They left without slamming the car doors. Control doesn't slam, it glides. By evening, my phone had learned a new habit. Messages from numbers I recognized but rarely saw. A cousin who preferred Dan's barbecue to my stew. A neighbor who once borrowed my ladder and kept it a year. Hey sweetie, we're all worried. Maybe don't make this a legal thing. Family is family. Another message from Sarah's mother. We always respected you, Mary. Don't let outsiders poison you against your own. I sent each one to a folder labeled noise and answered none. The next morning Pastor Lewis called. Sister Brown. He began the way he always had. I've had Dan in my office. He's concerned you're under influences. I am, I said. Influenced by facts. He cleared his throat. Perhaps a mediated conversation. No, thank you, I said. When the facts are settled, conversation is unnecessary. When they aren't, conversation is unsafe. Pause like a held breath. We love you, he added, because that is what pastors are trained to say at the end of dangerous calls. I know, I said, and let it mean nothing more than its sound. Sarah moved to a wider theater. Facebook, where economies of pity pay well. I did not read the words. Iris sent a screenshot with the important parts blacked out. Pray for us during this difficult time caring for an aging parent. Legal predators. Manipulation. Our home at stake. The comments bloomed like mold. You're such a good daughter-in-law. So hard when elders get confused. Message me, I know a doctor. Iris typed only, I'm here. I responded with a small heart and put my phone face down on the table. Then came the letters. The first claimed to be gentle, a clarification drafted by a friend of a friend with a law degree. It urged reconciliation, recommended a joint account to reduce confusion, and suggested that any assets be consolidated for ease of oversight. I placed it under a paperweight and did nothing with it at all. The second was louder, a demand for access to my home, to retrieve personal property inadvertently retained. No inventory, no dates, no list. I sent it to Mr. Hamilton with a single line. Please advise their counsel that the door remains locked. He replied, advised. The economy of good lawyers is blessedly sparse. They tried Emma next. She arrived at my kitchen table with a heavy look and a backpack that seemed to breathe. Mom says you're mad, she said, opening and closing the zipper. Dad says you're listening to people who don't understand us. I poured her tea and cut a slice of bread. I'm listening to myself, I said. She looked at the steam rising from her cup as if it could tell the future. They fight about you at night, she whispered, as if whispering could make it untrue. It makes the house feel smaller. I'm sorry, I said, and I was, but not in the way they hoped. She slid her phone across the table. A new recording. Not secret this time. She had been told to gather proof I was unwell. The recording proved something else entirely. Dan's voice again, but this time raw. She thinks she can take it all back. She won't. I'll make sure she doesn't. A softer voice, Sarah. We just have to keep the pressure on. She hates conflict. She'll fold. I placed the phone back on the table and folded the napkin in my lap until its corners met. Thank you for trusting me, I said. You are not a courier. You are a child. You owe no one evidence. Emma nodded, relief and guilt sharing the same chair. We played cards until the clock forgot itself. When I drove her home, I did not go inside. The next day, my mailbox held 3 envelopes. One from the bank, confirming the revocations. One from Mr. Hamilton, enclosing copies of the notices sent to Dan and Sarah's counsel. And one without a return address, thick with photocopies. Inside were images of my old bank statements, cropped so my name was missing and the balances looked like someone else's blessing. Across the top in Sarah's tidy hand, she had written, "We've always managed this for you. Let us help." I slid the stack back into the envelope and placed it in a drawer beside the warranties for appliances I never needed help operating. By Saturday, they abandoned words and tried proximity. I woke to the sound of a car idling at the curb. I made coffee, sat in the front room, and let the engine run out of patience. When the doorbell rang, I did not answer. The camera caught Dan's face, close and startled by his own reflection in the glass. You could see him decide not to speak into the intercom. Quiet men know when cameras are better listeners than mothers. He sent a message instead. We're done being nice. You can't cut us out. If you don't stop, we'll have you evaluated. Courts listen when children are united. I forwarded it to Mr. Hamilton and watered my spider plant. On Sunday, Sarah's mother cornered me after service in the aisle near the stained glass. She took my arm lightly, as if she were preventing a fall. "Mary dear," she said, her voice dipped in balm. "I know this must be so confusing for you. Paperwork, numbers. Let the young carry it." "I have carried more than paperwork," I said. "And I have set it down." Her smile lifted at the edges and dropped at the center. "It would be such a shame," she murmured, "if people thought you were unwell." "I am not concerned with people," I said. "I am concerned with records." I slipped my arm from her hand and walked to the door. The lake air met me like an ally that has read the minutes. By afternoon, the relatives had organized themselves into a chorus. Aunt Elaine's voicemail was all fret. Cousin Jim's was practical menace dressed as advice. My sister's was simply tired. I listened to each message once, then saved them in a folder Mr. Hamilton labeled narratives. People tell you who they are when they think you've forgotten your own name. That night, the porch light picked out a white envelope slid beneath my door. Inside was a single page. A proposed care plan, assigning Dan as primary decision-maker and Sarah as household delegate. It read like a will where I was already dead. I poured myself water, drank it standing, and placed the plan under the leg of the wobbly kitchen chair. The chair steadied at once. On Monday, their attorney sent an email requesting a good faith meeting at a cafe near the lake. Mr. Hamilton replied on my behalf. "My client will communicate in writing only. Please list your claims with dates, documents, and specific items requested." The reply came back swift and empty. "Claims prefer fog. Pressure has a schedule. It leans first, then weighs, then sits." When sitting didn't work, they tried theater. An ambulance slow up my street, then away. A wellness check at my door that ended with the officer admiring my tomato starts on the windowsill. A rumor that I had fallen in the bath, which I hadn't, and that I was refusing help, which I was not. Each small performance floated past, left a ring, and evaporated. Through it all I kept to my work. Receipts in order. Files labeled. The red folder swelling with quiet. Cooked for myself. I ironed the pillowcases because I like cool linen against my cheek. I walked at dusk and counted the steps between the lampposts. I answered no provocation and authored no scene. When people asked me softly what I wanted, I told them the truth in a sentence small enough to fit in a teacup. I wanted my life to belong to me. By week's end, the calls slowed. Pressure is expensive. Even zealots have errands. That evening, Iris sat with me on the porch. We watched a line of geese drag the lake's skin into small seams. "Do you feel alone?" she asked. "No," I said. "I feel singular." She nodded like a gardener does when a plant finally takes. We didn't talk about court or settlement or how long any of this would take to finish. We watched the geese rethread themselves and the wind skitter leaves across the walk, and I understood the shape of the thing I was building. Had no doorbell. Had good locks. It faced the water. When the porch light clicked on, Iris stood. "You've done enough for today," she said. "Yes," I said. "And not one thing more." By the time the maple out front dropped its last brown hands, the house had learned my new quiet. Mornings began with one cup on the tray, one spoon, one slice of toast. I stopped laying out second napkins out of habit. The air felt honest again. No rehearsals, no listening for cars that slowed outside as if the driveway still belonged to them. The lawyer's work ran under everything like a current. Paper moved and the water line lowered. There were letters from their attorney with softened edges, then letters with none. A month in, Mr. Hamilton called and said the sentence we had been walking toward. They wanted to end without a courtroom. I told him to make it end with records, not apologies. What emerged was not victory exactly. Victories are loud and make people want to take pictures. This was a shape that fit inside a file folder. Consent order. A relinquishment of any authority over my accounts, on paper and in the bank's own throat. A signed acknowledgement that the key to my safe was not theirs to hold, that any property removed would be returned or accounted for. A repayment schedule for the sums that could be traced, with dates like fence posts. No misunderstandings. No accidents. Just figures. A line where a name was supposed to be and a signature that trembled enough to tell the truth. I did not ask the police to go further. The detective said we could. I told him I had already recovered what mattered, the little square of ground around my chair. He looked at me the way young men sometimes do when they are forced to admit the strength of something that never raised its voice. A week after the order, a padded envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside, wrapped in tissue that smelled like a store, lay my mother's locket. The clasp was bent, the hinge a little tired, but the oval clicked shut with the same small sound I remembered from Sundays. No note. They chose to let the envelope speak for them. I set the locket on the windowsill with Richard's penknife and the bowl of black buttons. The three of them made a still life of ordinary faithfulness. The watch did not come home. Neither did the cash. The bonds, some not all, turned up at a branch 2 towns over, surrendered politely by a boy whose name I will never remember. Enough returned to remind me that not everything wants to be lost. Dan did not come back to the porch. Sarah wrote once, a message composed like a photograph, arranged and corrected, no shadow touching her own face. We're sorry for any distress. We hope to rebuild. I replied with my lawyer's address and the sentence that had become my whole vocabulary for them. All communication in writing. I do not think she has ever forgiven me for not offering her the soft landing she expected to be called mercy. There were no more wellness checks. The ambulance did not idle on the street again. Pastor Lewis sent a card with a verse about understanding. I propped it on the mantel for a week and then slid it into the drawer where I keep the spare keys. That soft graveyard of good intentions. Emma kept coming. Sometimes she biked, helmet crooked, cheeks bright. Sometimes she walked with her hands buried in a coat borrowed from Sarah and not quite relinquished. We sat at the kitchen table with our elbows squared and played the long games. Gin rummy, patience, dominoes until the dots looked like falling stars. I did not ask what the house felt like when she went back. Children are not couriers. Neither are they shields. One afternoon she pressed an envelope across the table, awkward and proud. Inside were the screenshots and the recording she had brought me before, printed and labeled in her careful block letters. For your folder, she wrote at the bottom, as if justice were a homework assignment. I slid them into the tab marked evidence and watched her shoulders drop when the drawer closed. We found small rituals that had nothing to do with survival. We learned to bake shortbread properly. Cold butter, a patient hand. We pressed leaves in the old dictionary no one else had wanted. We gave the stray cat at the back steps a name without ever trying to make him come inside. She told me what the lake looked like at dawn from the far pier when no one was awake to say who the shore belonged to. I told her which birds return first when winter starts to loosen its grip. We had language again, and it contained no one's verdict. At night, after she went home, I made the rounds of the locks without the old ache in my stomach. I did not listen for steps. I listened for the dependable sounds. The refrigerator's sigh, the settling sigh of wood that has worked all day holding up your life. The cameras kept ticking away, patient and bored. I stopped checking them unless the wind threw a branch against the glass. Neighbors adjusted. The ones who had called to check in during the busy days now waved from the street and kept walking. The ones who had said nothing began to bring over the useful things. An extra tomato plant hardening on a porch, a casserole when someone fell across town, a spare snow shovel leaned against my railing the night before a storm. People reveal themselves in the aftermath. I saw more than I had planned to, and less, and I arranged my table accordingly. Iris visited on Thursdays. She watered the begonias and reset the clocks no one else would admit drifted. She never asked me to forget. She never asked me to forgive. She did not bring the world to explain it to me. She brought tea, and that was the right size for what a day can hold. Sometimes we spoke about the legal words, their careful bones. More often we did not. She understood that peace is not the absence of what wounded you. It is the refusal to offer it another chair. When spring leaned into the windows, Mr. Hamilton called one last time. "Everything is filed," he said. "All alerts remain in place. If anyone so much as breathes near your accounts, the bank will cough. If anyone attempts to speak for you, the paper will say no." He paused. "You've done well, Mary." "I have done enough," I answered, and meant it. After we hung up, I pulled the consent order from the red folder and read it once more, not for triumph, but for the pleasure of seeing affirmatives where I used to keep fear. The words were dry. That is how truth should read when you have bled for it. I took the locket from the sill and held it open in my palm. The tiny picture inside, my mother in her wedding dress, stern, hopeful, half smiling at a future she could not imagine, looked back up at me. I pressed the metal shut and threaded the chain through itself, twice, the way she had taught me when I was a girl and wanted trinkets to fit the size of my throat. In the afternoon, I walked down to the lake with a thermos of tea and 2 small shortbreads in wax paper. The pier was empty. The water wore its usual face, workmanlike, unastonished by any of us. I sat on the bench at the end, the one with a slat that catches if you lean back too far, and let my weight stay where it was. A pair of boys in bright hats practiced casting on the far side. An old couple in matching windbreakers counted each other's steps like they were keeping time in a song. A gull landed near my boot and stared for a crumb. I offered him one and he considered the bargain before taking it. The shore smelled like thaw and silt. I wrapped my hands around the cup and felt heat put its shoulder against my bones. Emma found me there. I had not told her I was coming, but children learn the geometry of our habits while we are busy searching for bigger maps. She sat shoulder to shoulder with me and said nothing. We ate our shortbread like we were breaking a small truce with hunger. After a while she asked, not looking at me, "Will it always be like this?" "No," I said. "Nothing is always." She nodded as if that had given her a long piece of string. We watched a dog lose then find its stick. The sun slipped out from a cloud and made the rips in the water look like brushed metal. Somewhere a car backfired and then apologized for it. I rested the thermos on my knee to keep it from rolling. When she stood to leave, she touched the chain at my throat and smiled at the locket without opening it. "Pretty," she said. "Old things know how to stay." "They do," I said, "when you let them." I walked home slowly, as if distance were a fabric that needed smoothing. On the porch, I set the empty thermos on the step and swept the winter grit into a low pan. The broom made its own clear music. Inside, the living room kept its shape. The spare chair near the bookcase, where I used to lay out Emma's blanket for naps, looked like itself again. I did not feel sorry for it. A chair can be ready without being waiting. That evening I made a small dinner. An egg, a heel of bread toasted in the pan, a handful of greens with vinegar. I ate at the kitchen table with the window open a finger's width to let the cold remind me of edges. When the phone lit up with a number I knew too well, I let it ring and then go quiet. The voicemail indicator winked, hopeful and then ordinary. I deleted it without listening. I had learned to prefer proof to performance. Before bed, I turned each lock with the steadiness of someone folding a shirt and placing it where it belongs. I checked the camera screens, glanced at the dates in the corners like one glances at the hour before deciding a night has done enough. I lifted the locket from my neck and set it beside the penknife and the buttons. In the glass of the window, my face floated for a moment, an older woman in a small house she had cleaned of other people's ideas. I turned out the lights. Somewhere on the lake, a buoy knocked once and then was still. In the dark, the house breathed the way I do when the worry leaves. Not deeper, not louder, just honest. I lay down and let the quiet have its rightful size. In the morning, there would be tea on the porch, and a list of small tasks with nothing predatory hidden underneath. Turn the soil, oil the hinges, mend the seam of the blue pillowcase. If the mail brought anything with a tone, it would go in the drawer. If it brought a seed catalog, I would circle what pleased me and order exactly what I wanted. I have no plans to move. The lake is enough. The work is enough. The room I occupy in this life is exactly the width of my shoulders. I set one cup on the tray and that is enough.